¿Cómo estás?
Muy bien, gracias.
De nada. Bienvenidos.
Mucho gusto. Hi, I'm Annie Ayala.
And I'm Sandy Leslie.
Good morning. We are going to go ahead and start our video presentation for our intercultural communication report. And I was just introducing myself to Sandy. She said hello, and I said hello back, and then she welcomed me to her home, and I told her thank you so much. I'm very gracious and very glad to be here. So I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation first, and then we'll go ahead and move on to Sandy's part. Thank you so much for allowing us the opportunity to do this video together. I think that it's going to work a whole lot better since we are blending our presentation together. Okay, as I said, this is Sandy Leslie. Sandy and I met actually a while back. We had some dealings with the courts. We both are in the same field, business field. I'm a paralegal. She works with the court system, and we would periodically have business dealings together, and so we kind of got to know each other a little bit that way. And then one day I enrolled in the Intercultural Communications class and saw Sandy's name on the roster, and I thought maybe it's the same Sandy. So I contacted her, and it actually was, and so we were excited to know we were in the same class, and we were more excited to find out that you allowed us to partner up for this project. Thank you so much. So Sandy is a fifth-generation Texan, and very, very proud of her Texas roots. I'm going to go ahead and start my actual body of my presentation now. So I want to go ahead and just let you know that Sandy is a very proud person, and I agree with that. She has a lot of reasons to be proud, especially being from Texas, and as the old saying goes, I believe I put that in my first report, if you're not born in Texas, you get here as quickly as you can. And so I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation by panning on some very important parts. This is Sandy's home. She graciously invited me here to go ahead and do our presentation. So I'm going to point two very important treasures that Sandy has. One of them is here in the corner. I don't know how much you can catch of the room, Professor Zood, but this entire house is Texas out. I don't know if I'm using that word correctly, but everything's Texas decor. And I use the word decor, but it's more of a decor. It's more of a who Sandy truly is. This first piece I'd like to show you is a pair of boots that belong to her grandfather Staten, her granddaddy Staten, as she calls him, and his cowboy hat and a rose from his funeral service, as well as a Texas throw. She was very close to him, loved him dearly, and he's very missed. The second thing I'd like to show you is over here on the wall, and I think this is really neat. Her grandfather actually gave this to her as a gift, a set of longhorns. It actually was from his herd of cattle, and when it had died, he went and he actually boiled the head down, and he prepared that and made that himself. I think that's just awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and come back this way to finish my presentation. I'm going to try not to keep my back to you too much. I apologize for that. But like I said, when I walked in, we're not catching the front door, but as soon as you walk through the front door, there's a huge seal of the state of Texas and a big star that says state of Texas, wrought iron, and then even in the front door, there's glass inlaid with the Texas symbol. Everything denotes who she is as a proud Texan. Sandy was actually born in Austin, Texas, but she moved when she was about 2 or 3 to Palacios when her father started to go in business with his father in the welding. They had a welding company, or they had a welding company rather. Sandy tells me that Palacios is a very diverse community, that a lot of Hispanics and a lot of Vietnamese. There's a huge Vietnamese population. So even before she realized or even knew the term intercultural community, she was living in one. She was raised Southern Baptist, and her father was a minister, so she was at church, 3-4 times a week. And every activity was usually centered around the church and family. Now, she does have a small family as opposed to my family. I've got, about 300 plus relatives on both sides of my family. But Sandy has a very small family, and the nearest is actually about 3 hours away in Austin, and then the rest are a little farther out. So But she does have traditions that she holds very dear. When her grandmother was alive, she would go out and they would celebrate. She passed away when she was 108. Am I saying that right, Sandy?
Yes, my
When
great-grandmother.
her great-grandmother lived to be 108, and every year they would gather and they would celebrate her birthday, her family would. And so that was a huge deal for her. But she still does go out and spend time with her family. But now it's only about once a year, usually at Thanksgiving, and they hold dear to their traditions as we do. She still does the dressing that her grandmother made. They still prepare the same dishes. They still hold the same customs as we do on our side. So we've discovered that, we have come from a very diverse background, but we're very much alike. Surprisingly, or actually I said surprised her, that I'm very conservative, and I kind of expected her to be with her Southern Baptist background, but she was really surprised, and she'll touch more on that, to discover that I was a Republican and not a Democrat, as most Hispanics vote the Democrat ticket. I cannot remember when I became a Republican or even why, but I have been my entire life. I believe very strongly in family, believe very strongly in community, and as I said earlier, she is Southern Baptist. I was raised Catholic, and so we were at church, every Sunday, and of course when you went to catechism, CCE classes, usually on Wednesday, they changed them now to Thursday, but we still would go, and our community was very church-based, as I think they all were when we were younger. So like I said, Sandy has a huge tradition of service. She has strong roots. When she was younger, her father actually served in the military, as her grandfather served in the military, and goes way back to even one of her great cousins, a fifth, fourth, fifth, I don't know how you do that, generations removed, but he actually was a colonel in the Battle of San Jacinto. His name was Colonel Billingsley. So I actually find that fascinating, to have history that deep and that rich. Sandy and I were talking about how, we're both Texas and Mexico, that Texas actually was part of Mexico, so we're kind of, we're just like our family. So even though we're different, one of the questions you had asked us to touch on and to answer was, what can we take away from this experience? And what I'm taking away from this experience is learning that even though, like I said earlier, we're different religions, different backgrounds, we're very much the same, as we believe in, we're very conservative, and we have the same values, same family-oriented mindset. So I really can take away that even though we're diverse, we're the same. And I think that if everyone were to look at each other, even the people that are fighting in the Middle East, if they would take the time to just listen to somebody else and kind of, the old adage, walk a mile in their shoes, they would see that even though they're different, they still have the same beliefs. I can bet that they still have family as a value. They still, even if you're not conservative or you're liberal, you still have that type of, you still have a touch with each other that you can identify with someone else, even through their differences. So I think that's one thing you can take away. Another question you ask is, how do I feel this intercultural communication changed my relationship? It really didn't a whole lot, because I think, like I said, even though we're different, we're very much the same, as we do have the same values. So we didn't have any trouble really talking to each other or understanding each other, because we both speak English, even though my first language when I was younger is I grew up in a very Spanish household. So, but I've spoken English my whole time, so we had no problems with the language barrier. Although I can imagine you could possibly, but we did not. So I want to take an opportunity to say thank you so much for allowing me this project, and to get to know such a wonderful person, and I hope our relationship continues to grow, Sandy. Thank you so much for allowing me into your beautiful home. I appreciate that. I'm going to pass the camera to Sandy, and I'm going to go ahead and show you something that I showed her, how to prepare a traditional Spanish dish. So Sandy, I'm passing it to you now. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Annie. Again, this is Annie Ayala, my intercultural communication partner for the semester, and now I'm truly glad to say that she is also my friend as well. I'd like to give you a little background on Annie. She's a second-generation Texan. Her grandparents immigrated from Mexico to the United States in the 1930s. as newly minted Americans and Texans, they still held to a lot of their Mexican customs. They spoke Spanish in the home, and as in Mexico a lot of times, they lived predominantly in the same area, the family did, as I'll share a little later about Annie's family. We've learned a lot about each other's cultural backgrounds, but I want to focus on her rich Mexican traditions of being surrounded by family and mealtime. I think meals in every culture are an important part, and I have found it really fascinating, the things that Annie has shared with me about growing up. Annie, like she said, comes from a large family, what I consider a large family. She was one of 5 children. She lived on the same street as many of her aunts and uncles and cousins. Most of her aunts and uncles had 5 children or more of their own. She shared with me that oftentimes they would walk to Mass together on Sunday mornings, and then after Mass they would gather at her grandparents' house for Sunday dinner. She said there was always a reason to get together and to celebrate that also means eating. So a couple of items that are considered staples in the Mexican diet, one for sure is homemade tortillas. And as you can see here, Annie is graciously demonstrating for us how to make homemade tortillas. And I'm so very excited about this, as is my husband. He's hoping that I can pick this up as well. As you can see, Annie prepared the masa, or the dough, ahead of time, just because we have time constraints with our video here today. But she is using her grandmother's recipe. It was passed down to her from her grandmother. She has shared it with her children and now with her grandchildren. So that's 4 generations using the same recipe. And while Annie doesn't measure anything when she is doing this, she always uses the same ingredients. And we have those laid out for you here today. They are Armour lard, White Wings flour, Morton salt, and Clabber Girl baking powder. She never deviates from these ingredients. She also uses the same utensils every time. She brought with her today her rolling pin and the bowl that she uses to make tortillas. This bowl is only used to make tortillas, as she tells me. And if you notice, right when she started, the tortillas were wrapped in what she calls a tea towel. She has seasonal tea towels that she uses, but they are only used again for making tortillas as well, not for any other household use. Annie was raised primarily by her grandparents. They raised her and her 4 siblings. And her grandparents also helped to raise 5 of her cousins after the death of their mother. Oftentimes one of Annie's aunts would come over to her grandparents' house and help her grandmother cook meals. But as you can imagine, trying to feed 15 to 20 people at one time is a huge undertaking. Food was not purchased in small quantities like you see in front of us. Staples were purchased in bulk. Some of those staples would be the lard, the flour, rice and beans, and eggs. She told me how eggs were bought in pallets. As mentioned earlier, tortillas were served with every meal. Annie shared with me on one of the few occasions that she was able to sleep away at someone else's home. She was horrified when they didn't have tortillas at dinner time. She was offered bread and butter, and that just was unacceptable to her. But back to her grandparents' home, one of the things that I found very interesting that she shared was that her grandfather was served first. And this was a sign of respect as being a head of the household. Another interesting thing, since there were so many people that were fed at one time, they were fed cafeteria style directly from the stove. People would make their plates in the kitchen and then bring them to the dining room to eat. In my small family, which consisted of my parents and my sister and me, we would sit down at the dining room table, but the food was generally placed on the table and we just passed it around at dinner time. one of the things that I briefly mentioned was that Annie was not allowed to sleep over at other people's homes very often, and this is just part of the Mexican culture. They really just don't see any value in this. Now, me, on the other hand, I can remember going to church camp and staying away from home as early as 3rd grade, and I was able to stay at people's homes, and they were able to stay at mine quite often. So this is a difference in the way that we were raised. One other thing that Annie shared with me that I'd like to pass along is that while she was raised Catholic and took all her sacraments in the Catholic Church, but for marriage, she still believes in brujas, or witches, and other spirits and things of the such. She shared with me that one time her sister was ill and the doctors couldn't figure out why, so her mother actually took her to see a bruja and was told that a hex had been placed on her. So her mom paid the bruja to remove the hex, and she got well after this had taken place. So being raised Southern Baptist, this something is totally a foreign concept to me. Though I respect it, it's definitely a different upbringing, as I don't really think much about spirits and ghosts and things like that. That while I have mentioned several differences here today between us growing up, ultimately in the end, I think the similarities far outweigh the differences. At the end of the day, like Annie said, we both share very conservative views and the same political affiliation. We both have a love for history and the law. We both value our families very much. You had asked us to share how this experience had affected the way that we see our partner. And it's allowed us to be able to understand each other's background, but more importantly, it's truly allowed us to become friends that will go on long after this class is finished, and so I'm very grateful for that. And then lastly, you had asked us how to explain how this experience has shaped the way that we understand intercultural communication. And ultimately, I believe that it has shown us that, like we have stated time and time again, that most of us, at the end of the day, if we try to communicate with each other, we find out that we have more in common than we realize. So I'd like to thank you for allowing us to share with you today. Thank you for allowing us to partner up and to do this for our class. We've certainly enjoyed it and learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.